During the 2023 African Cup of Nations in Ivory Coast, a footballer celebrated a goal by mocking the statue of Patrice Lumumba. He mimicked being shot, fell on the ground, laughed, and in that moment, something interestingly happened. Africa did not laugh with him. Africa erupted with anger, with pain, with a fury that surprised even people who follow African politics closely. Because you do not mock Patrice Lumumba, not in Africa, not among people who understand what he was, what he represented, and what was done to him. A man dead for over 60 years, still capable of starting a continent-wide argument, still capable of making people feel something that raw, that protective, that personal. That is the measure of Patrice Lumumba. And today, we are going to talk about why.
Patrice Lumumba comes back to Leopold II a prisoner. The former Congo premier, who was captured when he fled inland, no longer wears the tuft of...
First, you need to understand Congo, because the story of Lumumba cannot be separated from the story of the country he loved. The Democratic Republic of Congo, one of the largest countries in Africa, sitting on mineral wealth so extraordinary that it has been called a geological scandal. Copper, cobalt, gold, diamonds, uranium. The uranium that went into the atomic bombs dropped on Japan came from Congo. Coltan, the mineral inside every smartphone on earth, comes largely from Congo. A country so rich in what the modern world needs that it should be one of the wealthiest nations on the planet. Instead, it is one of the poorest. And that gap between what Congo has and what Congo's people have is the story of Patrice Lumumba. Patrice Emery Lumumba was born on July 2nd, 1925 in Onalwa, a small village in the Kasai region of Belgium, Congo. He came from the Titila ethnic group, and from the very beginning he was different, curious, restless, hungry for knowledge, in a system designed to limit it. He educated himself far beyond what the colonial system intended, read everything he could find, taught himself French, wrote poetry, worked as a postal clerk, and began to think seriously, dangerously about colonialism, about what it was doing to his people, about what freedom would actually mean. Belgium ran Congo with extraordinary brutality. The history of the Belgian Congo is one of the darkest in colonial history. Under King Leopold II, before it was even a Belgian state colony, Congo had been his personal property, his personal source of robber wealth, enforced through terror. Hands cut off, villages burned, millions killed. It is estimated that Congo's population was reduced by half during the Leopold era. 10 million people gone. Belgium eventually took formal control, but the extraction never stopped. Only the methods changed, and Lumumba grew up in the shadow of all of that. By the late 1950s, independence movements were spreading across Africa. Ghana had gone free in 1957, Guinea in 1958, and Congo was restless. Lumumba had become the most electrifying political voice in the country. He co-founded the movement National Congolese, the MNC, one of the only truly national political movements in Congo, not based on ethnicity, not based on region, genuinely national, genuinely Pan-African, and that alone made him unique and dangerous. In January 1960, Belgium suddenly announced that Congo would be independent by June. A rushed, chaotic process with almost no preparation, almost no transfer of real power, almost no training of Congolese administrators. Belgium was leaving, but it was not letting go. June 30th, 1960, Independence Day. King Baudouin of Belgium came to Leopold II and gave a speech praising Belgian colonialism, calling it a civilizing mission, crediting Belgium for Congo's development, as if the 10 million people who died under Leopold, the generations of forced labor, the systematic humiliation of an entire people was something to be celebrated. The Congolese dignitaries sat and were expected to smile. Then Lumumba stood up and did something nobody expected. He spoke without permission, without warning. He looked at the Belgian king and he told the truth. He described what colonialism had actually been. The humiliations, the suffering, the exploitation. He told them to their face that Congo's independence had not been given. It had been won by the Congolese people in the face of Belgian resistance. The room went silent. Belgium was furious. The West was uncomfortable. And across Africa, people wept because someone had finally said it, and very loud, in front of the people who needed to hear it most. Lumumba became Congo's first prime minister. Joseph Kasavubu became president, and within weeks, everything began to fall apart. Because Belgium had not truly left. The army mutinied, Belgian troops intervened, and then came the succession of Katanga, the mineral-rich southern province, led by Moise Sombo, backed by Belgian mining interests, supported by Belgian officers and mercenaries. The richest part of Congo trying to break away so that its wealth could continue flowing to European corporations without the Congolese government getting in the way. Lumumba appealed to the United Nations. They came, but wouldn't help him suppress the Katanga succession. He appealed to the United States. They refused. In desperation, he turned to the Soviet Union for help, and that decision signed his death warrant. Because it was 1960, the height of the Cold War, and America had decided something. A Congolese leader who talked about African sovereignty, about controlling Congo's own resources, who had turned to the Soviets when the West refused to help him, was not someone America could allow to succeed. The CIA director Allen Dulles sent a cable to the CIA station in Leopoldville, describing Lumumba's removal as an urgent priority. The word used was elimination. President Kasavubu dismissed Lumumba in a constitutionally dubious move. Army Chief Joseph Mobutu, yes, the same Mobutu you know, staged a coup with CIA backing, and Lumumba was placed under house arrest, protected by United Nations peacekeepers who would not let Mobutu's soldiers in for a while. Lumumba tried to escape to reach his supporters in Stanleyville. He was captured by Mobutu's forces, beaten, publicly humiliated, paraded before cameras, his hands tied behind his back, his shirt torn, his face bloodied. This was the man who 3 months earlier had stood before a king and spoke truth to power, now being beaten on camera while soldiers laughed. He was transferred to Katanga into the hands of his enemies, Sombo's forces, Belgian officers, and on January 17, 1961, Patrice Lumumba was driven to a remote location, stood before a firing squad, and was shot. He was 35 years old. His body was buried, then dug up and dissolved in acid by a Belgian police officer named Gerald Soeti, who later boasted about it in interviews, kept Lumumba's teeth as souvenirs, bragged about what he had done to the man Africa called its greatest leader. In 2002, Belgium formally acknowledged its role in the assassination, expressed regret. In 2022, Belgium returned a gold-capped tooth, the only physical remains of Patrice Lumumba, to his family. 62 years later, a tooth. CIA documents that classified over the decades confirmed American involvement in the plot. The extent of direct US participation in the actual killing remains debated, but the intent was documented. The support for his removal was documented, and the man who replaced him, Mobutu Sese Seko, was backed by the United States for 32 years, while he looted Congo to nothing, while the Congolese people suffered because a man who would steal everything was more useful to the Western interests than a man who wanted Congo's wealth to belong to Congolese people. So here is what I want you to take away from this story. Lumumba was not killed because he was a communist. He was not killed because he was dangerous. He was killed because he was serious, because he meant what he said, because when he talked about African sovereignty, about Congo's resources belonging to Congolese people, about independence meaning something real, not just a flag change, not just a new name on the same building. He meant every word, and that sincerity was the most threatening thing in the room. When that footballer mocked his statue and Africa erupted, it was not just anger about disrespect to a dead man. It was anger about everything Lumumba represented, everything that was stolen when he was stolen. The future Congo might have had, the Africa that might have been, if a 35-year-old with a vision had been allowed to live. You cannot dissolve an idea in acid. You cannot bury a legacy in a shallow grave. You cannot return a truth and call it justice. Patrice Lumumba had been dead for over 60 years, and Africa is still not done grieving him. If the story made you think, there are more like it on this channel. Real history, real story, broken down simply. Subscribe and don't miss the next one.